My daughter was just over 2 years old. For 2 years, I had been raising her largely on my own. For 2 years, her father had only seen her a handful of times. She barely knew him. She had strong stranger apprehension, and I was convinced she would hide behind me when she saw him. Instead, she ran straight into his arms, without hesitation, without fear. She wrapped her tiny arms around him and held him. And as I stood there crying in the middle of that mall, I realized something that would completely change my life. Not just as a mother, as a person. Because that moment forced me to confront a lesson I had spent years avoiding. You cannot save everyone, and being a good person does not guarantee a good outcome. For most of my life, I believed the opposite. I thought if I loved enough, gave enough, sacrificed enough, forgave enough, and stayed patient enough, eventually everything would work out. I thought loving people deeply would guarantee they would love me the same way in return. I was wrong, and that realization changed my life. If you've ever done everything right and still ended up hurt, then this story is for you. Years earlier, I had been married to someone I had known for 7 years. We had built a life together, a home, friends, dreams, a future that felt certain. Then it all fell apart. When the marriage ended, I lost more than a relationship. I lost the life I thought I was building. I moved back home feeling like I was starting over from nothing. Eventually, I remarried. This time I came in with hope. I believed the pain had prepared me for something better. I wanted partnership, growth, peace. And like many people, I believed that if I loved someone enough, I could help them become the best version of themselves. I believed being needed was the same thing as being loved. That belief would cost me years of my life. Because I had confused love with self-sacrifice. I had confused empathy with responsibility. And I had confused giving with worthiness. Early in that marriage, I knew something wasn't right. That quiet voice inside me knew. But I ignored it. Because I wanted the relationship to work. Because I wanted the story to have a happy ending. Then children entered the picture, and everything became more complicated. The marriage became a constant battle between staying and leaving. Staying for the family, leaving for my peace. Staying because things might improve. Leaving because I was disappearing. Eventually, I left. I took my daughter and started over. Again. For 2 years, we lived separately. For 2 years, I carried the uncertainty, the legal battles, and the exhaustion. And during those 2 years, her father saw her only a handful of times. Then came the day at the mall, the day she ran into his arms, the day that changed everything. What made that moment so powerful was that she barely knew him, yet somehow she recognized him. Something in her heart knew he was her father. And standing there watching them hold each other, I began telling myself a story. I thought maybe this was what he needed. Maybe if a little girl could love her father this deeply, something inside him would finally wake up. Maybe the father in him would emerge. Maybe this was the beginning of healing. Maybe this was finally the happy ending. Then, after reconciling and starting over together, I discovered he was addicted to cocaine. And suddenly those missing years made sense. The disconnection made sense. Because addiction doesn't just numb pain. It numbs life. It numbs connection. It numbs responsibility. It numbs emotion. I realized that what I thought was a father struggling to connect was actually a man fighting a battle I couldn't yet see. A battle he chose. But I wasn't ready to give up. I spent my savings sending him to rehab. And for a brief moment, it worked. Then life hit again. My brother passed away. One of the most painful losses of my life. The grief was overwhelming, and eventually there was another relapse. Once again, everything felt like it was falling apart. And this time, I was pregnant. I wish I could tell you there was a moment where everything suddenly made sense. There wasn't. Most healing doesn't happen all at once. It happens one painful day at a time. Around that same time, I made a decision that would change my future. I went back to school because it was necessary. Then, near the end of my pregnancy, I finally made the decision to leave. It was just too much. His addiction accompanied disrespect, paranoia, and anger. It was impossible to sustain. At the time, it felt like failure. I was about to become a mother of two, yet I was leaving my marriage. And I couldn't understand why my life seemed to be falling apart again. What I didn't know was that only a month later, my son would arrive 5 weeks early. My water broke unexpectedly at 2 o'clock in the morning, and what nobody knew at the time was that I had an undiagnosed placenta previa. Suddenly, I found myself facing an emergency C-section and one of the most frightening experiences of my life. Then my son spent 14 days in the NICU. Looking back now, that experience changed the way I understand hardship. Because had I stayed in that marriage, the person responsible for helping me navigate that emergency would have been my husband. And at that point in his addiction, 2 in the morning was often the exact time he would be high. Instead, my father got me to the hospital. My father helped me navigate one of the hardest seasons of my life. And for the first time, I began to understand something I had missed for years. Sometimes what we call loss is actually protection. Sometimes what feels like life falling apart is life quietly rearranging itself. Those 14 days changed me. Every morning I would wake up, go to school, pump milk, bring it to the hospital, visit my baby, study, travel home, and do it all again the next day. No applause, no audience, just faith, just perseverance, just a mother trying to keep going all alone. Looking back now, those moments revealed who I really was. Not because I was fearless. I was terrified. Not because I was strong all the time. I wasn't. I cried. I broke down. I questioned everything. But strength isn't the absence of fear. Strength is moving forward while carrying it. Today, people sometimes ask me if I regret everything that happened. The answer surprises them. No, I don't. Because if my first marriage hadn't happened, I wouldn't be who I am. If my second marriage hadn't happened, I wouldn't have my children. If the hardships hadn't happened, I wouldn't have discovered my strength. If the losses hadn't happened, I might never have discovered my faith. For years, I thought what would save me was finding the right person. Then I thought what would save me was fixing the problems. Then I thought what would save me was controlling the outcome. I was wrong. What saved me was faith. What saved me was surrender. What saved me was learning that my worth wasn't tied to who stayed, who left, or how perfectly life unfolded. And that's why this channel is called What Saved Me. Because the thing that ultimately changed my life wasn't finding control. It was learning how to trust. Trust God. Trust that not every closed door is a punishment. Trust that not every loss is a failure. Trust that sometimes what feels like the end is actually the beginning. If you've ever felt broken, lost, heartbroken, anxious, exhausted, or uncertain about your future, I want you to know something. Your story is not over. The chapter you're in is not the entire book. And sometimes the very thing that feels like it's destroying you is quietly building the person you're meant to become. If that message resonates with you, subscribe and join me. We're just getting started.